Today we have some more actual history about some of the first American settlers in Tennessee in the late 1700s around the time of the American Revolution. We will hear about the journey to Middle Tennessee by a large group of people led by a man named James Robertson, who is called the Father of Tennessee by some historians. We will be reading from this book, Early History of Middle Tennessee, by Edward Albright. This book was published all the way back in 1908. Robertson split up this group of settlers into a party that came by land, which was led by himself and consisted mostly of men, and another party who came by boat along the rivers which led to the Cumberland. This latter group had more women and children settlers. As you will see, both of these parties faced many dangers and challenges, but the riverboat party probably had it worse, as they were attacked by several groups of hostile Chickamauga Indians. Because of glowing accounts given by the hunters on their return from the French Lick country, a number of colonists in East Tennessee, North Carolina, and Virginia decided to move thither and form a settlement. At a council of those interested held at Watauga, it was decided that a company of men should first go over, clear land, and raise a crop of corn, that their wives and children might have bread awaiting them when the removal should take place later on. For this purpose, a party set out from Watauga in the month of February 1779. This band of hardy pioneers consisted of James Robertson, George Freeland, William Neely, Edward Swanson, James Hanley, Mark Robertson, Zachariah White, William Overall, and a black man whose name is unknown. James Robertson, the leader, had carefully selected his men, taking with him only suitable volunteers and experienced woodmen, all true and tried. After 3 weeks of hardships on their journey over the mountains and through the wilderness, they reached the French Lick. A few days later they were joined by a small company from the region of New River, Virginia. These were led by Casper Mansker, with whom Robertson had doubtless been in correspondence before leaving Watauga. A body of land near the Sulphur Spring, and now within the corporate limits of Nashville, was selected as the site of the cornfield. This both parties united in clearing, planting, and cultivating during the spring and summer which followed. Around it they built a rude fence for its protection against the wild animals that came daily to drink at the spring. When at length the crop was laid by, Swanson, White, and Overall were left to keep the buffalo out of the corn, while the rest of the party returned to the settlement for their families. James Robertson, however, did not go with the latter, but made the journey homeward by way of Kaskaskia, Illinois. This pilgrimage was for the purpose of having an interview with General George Rogers Clark, a distinguished citizen and soldier of Virginia, and pioneer in the settlements of Kentucky. The latter had founded the city of Louisville at the Falls of the Ohio in 1778, and was now quartered at Kaskaskia, at the French fort he had recently captured. As previously related, the boundary line between North Carolina and Virginia, to which the territory included in Tennessee and Kentucky at this time respectively belonged, had not yet been fixed. Robertson believed that the country around French Lick was within the limits of Virginia. He also doubted the legality of the title thereto of Henderson's Transylvania Company, under whose patronage he and his followers had come. He had heard that General Clark, as the agent of Virginia, had for sale along the Cumberland certain land claims, called cabin rights, which could be bought for a small sum. By the purchase of these he might insure himself and his fellow immigrants against future annoyance. Just what information Robertson received during his visit is unknown to history. It is believed, however, that General Clark gave him assurance that French Lick was safely within the boundary of North Carolina, and that he would therefore need no favors from Virginia. At least that was the impression that soon thereafter prevailed among the colonists. Before leaving Kaskaskia, Robertson bought a drove of livestock, consisting of horses, mules, and ponies. Finding some men who were going to East Tennessee, he offered them passage on the backs of his animals. The proposition was readily accepted, and soon this caravan was on its way to Watauga, the route being to Harrodsburg, Kentucky, and thence through the Cumberland Gap. On reaching home, Robertson found everything in readiness for an early removal to the new settlement. By the middle of October, a company of about 380 immigrants, gathered from all the settlements between Knoxville and New River, were ready to begin the journey. It was arranged that they should go in 2 parties. The first of these, led by James Robertson, consisting of a majority of the men, should travel overland, and by an early arrival have everything in readiness for the coming of the second party. The latter, composed largely of the families of the first party, and commanded by Colonel John Donelson and Captain John Blackmore, were to proceed by boats down the Tennessee River to the Ohio and thence up the Cumberland to French Lick. It was agreed that after the arrival of the land party at the new settlement, some of their number should go down to the upper end of Muscle Shoals on the Tennessee River in North Alabama. There they would either await the coming of the voyagers under Donelson and Blackmore, or leave certain signs indicating whether or not it was considered safe for the river party to quit the boats, and go from thence across the country to the French Lick. If this could be done, it would shorten the journey, and also avoid the danger of running the shoals. Colonel John Donelson, who is mentioned in connection with the above, was born in the year 1718, and was a native of Pittsylvania County, Virginia. He was by profession a surveyor, which vocation in that day was a mark of the highest educational attainment. From the same section of Virginia originally came the Robertsons, the Bledsoes, the Cartwrights, and Hendersons, all of whom were untiring in their efforts to extend the limits of civilization across the western mountains. We shall learn much more of Colonel Donelson in subsequent chapters. James Robertson, the leader of the expedition about to be described, and who from henceforth will play an important part in the Cumberland settlements, is called by some historians the father of Tennessee. With equal propriety he may be called the father of Middle Tennessee. He was born in Brunswick County, Virginia on June 28, 1742, and while yet a youth removed with his parents to Orange County, now Wake County, North Carolina. In 1768 he married Miss Charlotte Reeves of that state. Having heard and answered the alluring call of the West, he journeyed in the spring of 1770 from North Carolina to the Holston River in East Tennessee. There he lent his aid to the Shelbys, Seviers, and others founding Watauga, the first colony west of the mountains. For 9 years previous to his coming to the Cumberland, he had heroically braved the dangers of the wilderness, and suffered innumerable privations because of the ravages of hostile Indians, being exposed to the cruelties of these savage foes. Of him, Judge John Haywood, his contemporary and intimate friend, has said, "Like almost all those in America who have attained distinction, Robertson could boast of neither noble lineage nor splendid ancestry, but he had what was far more valuable, a sound mind, a healthy body, a robust frame, an intrepid soul, and an emulous desire for honest fame." In personal appearance, Robertson was tall and of fair complexion, with light blue eyes and dark hair. Though quiet and retiring in manner, he was by nature a leader of men, and master of affairs. During the 35 years succeeding the foundation of the Cumberland settlements, he was a representative of the federal government in the negotiation of every treaty made with the Indians of the South. The latter held him in great veneration, always explaining this esteem by saying that he has winning ways and makes no fuss. In dealings with the Indians, Robertson was unquestionably the greatest diplomat the world has ever known. But let us return to the immigrants. Late in October 1779, the Overland Party, about 200 strong, left Watauga. The route chosen was a difficult one, leading as it did by way of southern Kentucky. Passing along the well-beaten trace through the mountains at Cumberland Gap, they traveled what was then known as the Kentucky Trace to Whitley Station on Dix River, thence to Carpenter Station on Green River, and thence to Robertson's Fork on the north side of Green River. From there they journeyed down the river to Pittman Station, descending the stream to Little Barren, which was crossed at Elk Lick. From thence they passed over to Big Barren and then up Drake's Creek to a noted bituminous spring, thence to a location in Simpson County called Maple Swamp. From the latter place they crossed into Robertson County, Tennessee, and traveled along Red River to Cross Plains, going south by way of Goodlettsville and passing over Cumberland River at the Bluff, where Nashville now stands. This, the end of their journey, was reached in the latter part of December, probably on Christmas Day, 1779, and quite 2 months after their departure from Watauga. The weather during the months of November and December had been extremely severe, a large part of the journey having been made through snow. The party had suffered much from cold. This season has ever since been known throughout the eastern states as the hard winter. However, Robertson and all his followers arrived in safety, having traveled about 500 miles. No deaths had occurred, and they had been free from attacks by the Indians. Cumberland River was frozen solid from bank to bank, and the entire party crossed over on the ice. When they were in midstream, the ice began to break with a cracking sound that might have been heard for many miles. It only settled a little, however, and finally landed them safe on the other side. Soon after leaving Watauga, Robertson and his companions had been overtaken by a party from New River under the leadership of John Rains. The latter had with them both horses and cattle, and were bound for Harrods Station, which was located at the present site of Harrodsburg in Mercer County, Kentucky. Robertson prevailed on them to change their plan and accompany him to French Lick. Rains had formerly visited both locations, and in discussing the matter with Robertson declared that he felt like a man who wished to get married, and knew two beautiful women, either of whom he could have, and both of whom he wanted. During the same winter, Casper Mansker, Daniel Frazier, Amos Eaton, and a number of other immigrants followed the route pursued by the First Company, and after suffering great privations reached the Cumberland country about the 1st of January. Near the same time there arrived from South Carolina a party consisting of John and Alex Buchanan, Daniel and Sampson Williams, John and James Mulherin, Thomas Thompson, and others whose names are now unknown, all of whom had come to cast their fortunes with the new colony. Many ties of kinship were afterwards disclosed as existent between various members of these several companies, and it is more than likely that this seeming coincidental movement westward by those from widely separated localities was brought about by a previous natural correspondence resulting from such relations. There were a few women and children with the Rains and Mansker parties, but none with those led by Robertson and Buchanan. Seeing no signs of Indians on their arrival, and having been unmolested on their journey thither, the settlers were inclined to scatter over the country, locating on any body of land they might fancy within a radius of 20 or 25 miles of French Lick. Robertson, however, believed there was trouble ahead, and therefore advised the building of a stockade, into which all should come for protection at night. By many this advice went unheeded, and as a result, they soon came to grief. It was agreed, however, that the stockade at the Bluff should be headquarters for the colony. This fort, which was called Bluff Station, was located on the foot of Church Street in what is now the city of Nashville, and near a bold spring, the water of which at that time flowed out of the bank and down a precipice into the river. This spring was filled and lost sight of while the city was in progress of building, but was again uncovered a few years ago by workmen who were excavating for the foundation of a new structure in that vicinity. This fort was to be a place of general council, the seat of governments, and together with a small village which sprang up immediately around it was officially called Nashboro, in honor of General Francis Nash, a former governor of North Carolina and brigadier general in the Revolutionary Army. He was mortally wounded and died at Germantown on October 4, 1777. In the latter part of January, some of the men in pursuit of game through the woods were surprised to find traces of a party of Indians. These they were able to identify by the moccasin prints, and also because the toes of the tracks turned inward, a characteristic of the Indian foot. Following on apace, the hunters found them encamped on a branch of Mill Creek in Davidson County, a few miles south of the Bluff. The stream mentioned has since been called Indian Creek because of this incident. The whites returned at once to the Bluff, and a delegation was sent down from the settlement to seek an interview, and discover, if possible, whether the intruders were only friendly visitors, or on mischief bent. The whites had no interpreter, but after heap much talk, combined with a variety of sign-making, it was found that they were of the Delaware tribe. Probably ignorant of the advent of the settlers, they had journeyed hundreds of miles from their home in New Jersey for a quiet hunt in the reservation. Having been already for some time in Caney Fort country, which at that time abounded in game, they remained only a few days near the settlements, after which they quietly took their leave, going south into Alabama. This was the first Indian fright experienced by the settlers. Many others followed, some of which proved more serious in consequences. Soon after the erection of the stations, James Robertson, who, with such marked success, had led the largest of the four bands through the wilderness, was chosen colonel of the local militia. This office was conferred by unanimous vote and, for the time being, bestowed the highest authority in matters pertaining to the government and defense of the settlements. Though several months had now elapsed since the beginning of the journey from Watauga, no tidings had yet been received from the river party, and a feeling of uneasiness as to their safety began to pervade the colony. Let us return to the scene of their embarkment and follow them through the events of their voyage. Because of delays incident to such occasions, the fleets under Colonel Donelson and Captain Blackmore did not sail for nearly 2 months after the departure of the land force. Finally, however, the voyage was begun by each about the same time. Donelson's party from Fort Patrick Henry, 5 or 6 miles above the North Fork of Holston River, and that commanded by Blackmore from Blackmore's fort on Clinch River. Of the adventures of the latter we know but little, until after they were united with Donelson's fleet at the mouth of Clinch River, some time thereafter. Colonel Donelson was aboard the Adventure, the largest boat in the flotilla, and for this he kept a journal in which was recorded all the principal events of the journey, from the time of sailing until it reached the French Lick 4 months later. Fortunately, this document has been preserved, and is now in the archives of the Tennessee Historical Society at Nashville. It is styled a journal of a voyage intended by God's permission in the good boat Adventure, from Fort Patrick Henry on Holston River to the French Salt Springs on Cumberland River, kept by John Donelson. From this journal, we gain the information that the first mentioned wing of the fleet took its departure from Fort Patrick Henry on December 22nd. At that time, as we have already seen, the land party was within a few days of its destination. From there, the Adventure and its companion boats fell down the river to Reedy Creek, where they were stopped by low water and excessive cold. Here they remained for some time, finally reaching the mouth of Clouds Creek on Sunday evening, February 20th, 1780. They passed the mouth of French Broad River on Thursday morning, March 2nd. About noon that day, one of the boats which was conveying Hugh Henry and family ran on the point of Williams Island, 2 miles above Knoxville, and by force of the current sank. The freight therein was much damaged, and the lives of the passengers greatly endangered. Colonel Donelson ordered the whole fleet tied up, while the men of the party assisted in bailing the sunken boat and replacing her cargo. The same afternoon, Reuben Harrison, one of the party, went hunting in the woods along the shore, and did not return. During the afternoon and night, many guns were fired to warn him. Early next morning, a small 4-pound cannon, the property of Robert Cartwright, and which was mounted on the Adventure, was also fired, the voyagers hoping thereby to attract the attention of the lost man. Numerous parties were sent out to scour the woods, but all to no avail. On Saturday morning, March 4th, after leaving the young man's father and the occupants of a few boats to continue the search, the main party moved off downstream. About 10 o'clock that day, young Harrison was found, and taken aboard from the shore some miles below, to which place he had wandered the day before. The party camped that night on the south bank of the river in Loudoun County, near the present beautiful and picturesque site of Lenoir City. On Sunday morning, March 5th, the fleet was under way before sunrise, and at noon passed the mouth of Clinch River in Roane County, where Kingston now stands. 3 hours later, they overtook the boats under command of Captain Blackmore, the whole party camping again that night on the shore. Donelson's journal does not record the number of boats in this fleet, but James Cartwright, for many years a citizen of Gallatin, and whose father, Robert Cartwright, was with Donelson on the Adventure, related that when the boats from the Holston united with those from the Clinch, they were about 40 in number. These consisted of scows, canoes, and pirogues, the latter being a kind of rude craft hollowed out from the trunks of trees. Nearly all the boats had 2 or more families aboard. In the combined party there were 130 women and children, and about 50 men. The cargo consisted of the household goods and personal effects of those aboard, and of those who had gone with Robertson by land. The Adventure carried the largest number of passengers. Among them were the wife and 5 children of James Robertson, Robert Cartwright and family, and Colonel Donelson's family, including his daughter Rachel, who afterwards became the wife of General Andrew Jackson. The names of other persons who came with this fleet are as follows: John Donelson, Jr., son of Colonel Donelson, Benjamin Porter, Hugh Rogan, James McCain, Isaac Neely, John Cotton, Jonathan Jennings, William Crutchfield, John Boyd, Isaac Renfro, John and Solomon Turpin, Francis Armstrong, John Montgomery, Isaac Lanier, Daniel Durham, John Cockrell, John Caffrey, Thomas Hutchins, Benjamin Bellew, John Gibson, Hugh and Thomas Henry, Frank Haney, Russell Gower, Daniel Chambers, David Gwynn, M. Roundsever, and men named Maxwell, Stewart, Payne, and Johns, also Mrs. Mary Purnell and Mrs. Mary Henry, and their respective families. The flotilla now proceeded in a body. During Wednesday, March 8th, they came to the first inhabited Indian town on the Tennessee River, near Chattanooga. Its inhabitants were of the treacherous Chickamauga tribes, who, on sighting the boats, came flocking to the river and insisted that the voyagers should come ashore. They gave signs of friendship, calling the whites brothers and addressing them in other familiar terms, insomuch that John Donelson Jr. and John Caffrey took a canoe and rowed toward them, the fleet having anchored on the opposite shore. When Donelson and Caffrey were about midstream, they were met by Archie Cootie, a half-breed, and several other Indians who warned them to return to the fleet. They did so, followed by Cootie and his companions. The latter seemed friendly, and Colonel Donelson distributed among them presents, with which they were much pleased. Looking across toward the village just at this time, they saw a large party of Indians armed and painted in red and black, embarking in canoes on the other side. Cootie at once made signs to his companions, ordering them to quit the fleet, which order they readily obeyed, while he remained with the whites and urged them to move off at once. The boats were scarcely underway again when they discovered the village Indians, still armed and bedecked in war paint, coming down the river seemingly to intercept them. However, the whites were not overtaken. Cootie rowed along in his canoe with the fleet for some time, but finally assuring Colonel Donelson that he had passed all the Chickamauga towns, and was therefore free from danger, turned about and rowed back toward the first village. The whites had not proceeded far, however, before they came in sight of another mud cabin town, situated likewise on the south side of the river, and nearly opposite a small island. Here the Indians again invited them to come ashore, calling them brothers as on the previous occasion. However, the settlers were too wise to be led into such a trap, and headed their boats for the opposite channel around the island. Seeing this, the Indians called to them through one of their number who could speak English, telling them that the channel chosen was unsafe, and that their side of the river was much better for such passage. Captain Blackmore's boat ran too near the northern shore, and was fired upon by a band of Indians who lay concealed near the bank. Young Mr. Payne, who was aboard the craft, was killed as a result of such an unexpected volley. There was with the flotilla a boat carrying 28 passengers, among whom an epidemic of smallpox had broken out. To guard against the spread of this disease to other members of the fleet, agreement had been made that it should keep well to the rear, its owner Mr. Stewart being notified each night by the sound of a hunting horn when those ahead went into camp. Therefore, this unfortunate party was far behind while the events above were taking place. When they came down opposite the towns, the Indians were on the shore in large numbers, and seeing them thus cut off from the rest of the fleet, swarmed out in canoes and with cold-blooded murderous intent, killed and captured the entire crew. Cries of the latter were distinctly heard by those in the boats ahead, but they were unable to stem the swift current, and thus returned to aid their perishing comrades. But the Indians suffered a swift and righteous retribution for this wanton act of cruelty. They became infected with the disease of their victims, and for many months thereafter smallpox raged, not only among the Chickamaugas, but in the tribes of their neighbors, the Creeks and Cherokees. When stricken with the malady, and while the fever was yet upon them, the Indians would take a heavy sweat in their huts. When driven to madness by the fever and heat, they would rush out and leap into the river, from the effects of which folly they died by scores. Old persons of today well remember the traditional accounts of a great and terrible mortality which prevailed among the Indians after the capture of Stewart's boat. So that's it for this episode. This story seems somewhat unique because a common element in many stories about smallpox epidemics among the Indians is that they caught smallpox from receiving poxed blankets that were given to them intentionally by the settlers. Although there are some cases where it seems likely that this type of biological warfare was attempted, there has been some controversy over how often poxed blankets were given to the Indians, and also whether the Indians actually caught smallpox in this manner. This story suggests that this particular smallpox epidemic started from the Indians killing and possibly capturing some of the settlers from the infected boat. Although the remaining boats proceeded safely past these Chickamauga towns on the Tennessee River, this river party is not out of the woods yet. Stay tuned to this channel because in the next few days we will be releasing a follow-up episode in this series about the perils this group endured during the remainder of their journey. This includes the attack on Mrs. Peyton by the Indians one day after she gave birth to her baby. This channel is called Unworthy History because we cover actual history that has been cast aside and deemed unworthy by history channels on TV. But here on this channel, we keep actual history alive. These are the stories of people whose shoes we are unworthy to stand in. If you'd like to join our mission here at Unworthy History, then consider joining our Patreon page or becoming a YouTube channel member. Your contribution towards keeping actual history alive will be recognized at the end of each episode, and you will also have access to special members-only videos. So if you want to see more episodes like this, then be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Unworthy History.